This is very controversial. Anything that I would say for to this question would be very controversial.
Soon do you think we will be able to definitely say we can detect life on other planets? I'm not sure that you can possibly answer that question, but I ask you to give it a try.
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question, and there are bets around. There are some people they say that JWST in the coming decades will do that already. I'm always more on the cautious side. I say probably in the next 50 years. We may be able to answer that question. I think that the important part is that we are the first generation of humans that actually has the technology available to answer this question scientifically.
That's a fantastic question. So I think one of the things that really motivates me for this deeper explanation is that, like, when we ask this "are we alone" question, I think if we really answer it, it should be incredibly empowering because we actually really understand what we are, which helps us understand more about what's happening on Earth now. So we face a lot of like existential problems, like we might invent machines that are more intelligent than ourselves, or we're facing existential threats of climate change and these kind of things. And the way I view them, at least from this perspective of the kind of physics I think is governing life, is that those are actually part of that physics. So the fact that intelligent systems would build more intelligent systems is kind of a natural progression of what that process would be. So I think, I guess what I'm getting at is if we understand what we are, we have a better idea of where we're going and how to actually steer our own future.
I think I kind of view the origin of life as like a series of bottlenecks and you have to kind of pass. And so it's possible that self-organized chemistry can happen with other elements under different conditions. But the question is, will they be able to pass all those bottlenecks that ends up producing something that resembles life as we would describe it? And I don't know, but I suspect it might be actually quite limited.
So the process of evolution, in the sense of Darwinian evolution, requires replication and variation that, in the sense of mutation, that's where chance comes into it, right? Mutations arise through essentially deterministic chemical pathways, but what mutation arises where in a particular cell or strand of RNA is essentially random. So it's that random variation occurring in a population that gives rise to new sequences that, usually are not helpful, but every now and then there's a good mutation and that can do something helpful for the cell that it's in. That cell has a better chance of surviving or going on to reproduce, and so it will eventually take over the population. So there's a role for chance, but chance events on a population can actually have deterministic outcomes. So for example, in some of our molecular evolution experiments, we see the same RNA motifs, three-dimensional structural motifs arising again and again, simply because they're the simplest way of doing something. So the interplay between chance and necessity is a very interesting thing to think.
This is the kind of foundation of the search for new life that we want to do in the lab. Now here, obviously, if I went to funders, I don't know what it's like everywhere, but if I went to a funder and said, hey, I need 10 million pounds to make an origin of life engine, please. I don't know if it's going to work. The funders might say, oh, Lee, we really like the origin of life idea, but, RNA did it. So don't worry. But what I did instead is say, well, hey, hang on, why don't we look and do drug discovery? And they said, oh, great, have some money. And by the way, once we're doing drug discovery, can we use this to repurpose it for the search for new life forms? They said, okay, go on. And that's kind of one of the points I want to make to young scientists here. It's like, you don't have to lie about your vision, but sometimes when your funders and your peers don't share your vision, just say, well, what are you interested in? And find a common overlap. And one of the reasons I built the computer was because of my desire, my certainty that we need to build an origin of life engine.
Think about, you've got a cell and it keeps accumulating material and it forms a barrier between the two daughter cells and somehow it divides. This is how modern cells work. Now, James and Elizabeth showed me this video, And this is a video of the minimal cell. And so this is the greatest moment in my scientific life. So you come in the morning expecting to see what you were expecting to see, a cell that divides. You expected it to be like a normal cell, but instead you start with one cell in this chamber and it doesn't divide. It makes a string of spaghetti that just grows and fills up the chamber. And the chamber, these strings of spaghetti are full of hundreds of copies of the bacterial genome. This was just wildly different than what I was expecting. And you live for moments like this as a scientist.
And I think, again, this work and related work is helping to uncover the language of cells. And if we could really understand the language of cells, we could move away from this top-down forcing on living systems. We could move away from bioprinting, from drugs, and we could move to a more natural solution where we simply convince the cells to do something that we know they're already capable of.
So the mirror test that I saw, and 2 years ago, there was a group from Japan and they saw that fish can pass this mirror test. However, I told you that this is not a very good test for awareness. So we are in this situation, and actually, if you talk with Gallup, that it was the original, has its own ideas. So what is the minimal body that you need? I don't know really, but I think, and this is outside science, so my personal feeling is that consciousness is a spectrum. So you can, it's not consciousness, not consciousness, okay? So it is like a progression of things happening, and then there is a spectrum, a continuous spectrum. Where is the limit? I certainly, I don't know. Maybe Willem, you can answer this question. Maybe you have any idea about what will be the minimal component, because we can even go to chemistry, right? So what will be the minimal component that could be conscious? I don't think that we can talk
I
about
thought you were going
plants.
to ask me whether I'm fully conscious.
I've
started to doubt already. Yeah, so.
In the same way there are stars being born in the universe, there is life emerging and life dying. That's the theory. I don't have any proof, but we haven't looked yet. And every time we've looked for these type of things, we have always worked that we are exceptional in the universe. But every time we've challenged that, we've found out that we're relatively ordinary.
When he did that, in this case, the physical xenobot in the bottom half of this video moves more or less like the evolutionary algorithm predicted that it would. You'll notice that there's obviously some differences in the shape and the behavior of the simulated and physical xenobot, but it's pretty close.
How do you keep enthusiastic about a project that takes really, literally decades to come to fruition, or maybe it will come to fruition after you retire? So how does that work in the astronomers field? Because again, I'm talking here as a chemist, where on Friday afternoon I can run into the lab and quickly try a couple of things, which admittedly are not of the same scale as discovering planets, but it is a very different dynamic.
Yeah, I believe the way I see that is, I know some of my work is useful, so will be useful for future generations of scientists. I'm not talking only about the first discovery. I think they've been doing a lot of stuff that's maybe not as glossy and as visible than the first discoveries, but people are using that. I mean, there is a build-up, and I have been using myself also the work of other people. So this feeling of the part of a time scale of the global effort, I just love it.